Well, good afternoon and welcome, Elon. Oh, I was going to take off my tie. Is that all right if I do that?
I came in with a tie, but then I was told there was a good tie, so.
Then we'll both be more comfortable.
That's good. Well, thanks for having me.
Appreciate your being here today. It's when I'm with you, it's difficult to know where to start. Let's start just what drives you. What is it that when you wake up in the morning, do you see a problem and you want to solve it?
I think the thing that drives me is that I want to be able to think about the future and feel good about that. We're doing what we can to have the future be as good as possible. To be inspired by what is likely to happen, and to look forward to the next day. So that's what really drives me is trying to figure out how do we make sure that things are great and going to be so, and that's the underlying principle behind Tesla and SpaceX. Is that I think it's pretty important that we accelerate the transition to sustainable generation and consumption of energy. It's inevitable, but it matters if it happens sooner or later. And then SpaceX is about helping make life multiplanetary and doing what we can to continue the dream of Apollo and ultimately make a contribution to life becoming multiplanetary.
Well, let's talk a little more about that. I think everyone's very interested in that when you say making life multiplanetary.
Yeah, that's exciting.
It is exciting. So what's your vision there?
I think, particularly for Americans, think about America is a nation of explorers. People came here from other parts of the world that, chose to give up the known in favor of the unknown. So I think exploration, I think the United States is a distillation of the human spirit of exploration. So that's why it appeals to Americans so much. You can see this when, say, there was a shuttle tragedy and 7 people died, and that's terrible, but a lot of people die all the time. But why do we care so much? Because it was the dream of exploration that was dying along with those people. That's why.
No, and I'm one of those, and probably like many of you, remember exactly where you were when that tragedy happened. So you have 30 plus governors here today, and we're very excited about your willingness to be with us. And you hopefully heard me talk a little bit about my initiative, which is being ahead of the curve. What do you tell us as governors? What should we be thinking about in terms of innovation and developing public policy for the future?
Well, it sure is important to get the rules right. It's sort of, in terms of legislative and executive actions, it's sort of like, if you think of, say, like professional sports or something. If you don't have the rules right, if there isn't, if the game isn't set up properly, it's not going to be a good game. So it's real important to get the rules right. Now, I think it's worth noting that I think still in the United States the rules are still better than anywhere else. It's very easy to put something in place which is an inhibitor to innovation without realizing it. So in terms of the regulatory environment, it's always important to bear in mind that regulations are immortal, and they never die unless somebody actually goes and kills them, and then they get a lot of momentum. So a lot of times regulations can be put in place for all the right reasons, but then nobody goes back and gets rid of them afterwards when they no longer make sense. And there used to be a rule in the early days when people were concerned about automobiles, because that was a pretty scary thing to see a carriage just going wrong by itself. You never know what those things might do. So there were like rules where you had to, in a lot of states, where you had to carry a lantern in front of the automobile. It had to be like 100 paces ahead of the automobile. There had to be someone with a lantern on a pole. I'm like, okay, but you should really get rid of that regulation. And they did, because that would really be awkward. So just regulations, even if done correctly and being right at the time, it's always important to go back and scrub those, periodically to make sure they're still sensible and they're still serving the greater good. I think in terms of tax structure, what is economically incented and what is not economically incented, just make sure that the incentive structure is correct. I think I'm saying just totally common sense things here. But it's economics 101. Whatever you incent will happen. So if you incent one thing, that thing will tend to happen more than the other thing. If you incent another thing, that thing will happen. And so the economics should favor innovation. And this is particularly important to protect small to medium-sized companies, because it's sort of like trying to grow a tree in a forest. Like, it's real hard for a new company to grow. When it's just a seedling or a sapling, it needs a lot more protection than if it's a giant redwood or something like that. So very important to give support to small to medium-sized companies on the innovation front. And they're the ones that need it more than the big companies. And I think at this point Tesla's almost a big company, biggish company anyway. So I'd favor, supporting smaller companies than Tesla, relatively speaking.
What would your response be? Because there are critics out there with regard to incentives, and that,
Sure.
and Tesla has been, and I can speak from experience, the beneficiary of incentives, economic incentives, with regard to the Gigafactory.
Sure.
What would you tell those people?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, as you know, those incentives were a little overstated. In the case of the Gigafactory, it's a $5 billion capital investment to get that factory going. And I didn't actually know this until, by the way, I didn't know this until we did the press conference. Actually, that over 20 years, the Nevada incentives added up to $1.3 billion. I actually didn't even know this. But it's,
now he's telling. Go ahead.
Literally, I learned it at the press conference. I'm like, really? No, but I mean, the thing is that they took what added up over 20 years and made it sound like Nevada was writing us a $1.3 billion check. And I'm still waiting for that check. Did it get lost in the mail? I don't know. But this is the way the press works, of course. Now if you divide 1.3 billion by 20, okay, then it's like, okay, Tesla's on average receives a sort of a tax. It's basically sales and use tax abatement is what it amounts to. So Tesla gets like we get on the order of 50 to 60 million of sales and use tax abatement divided over 20 years. But this is for something which has a $5 billion capital cost just to get going, and then would have to generate about $100 billion over that period of time to achieve a $1.3 billion tax benefit. So essentially, it's a little over 1% over that period of time, and that's great, okay? But it's not, it's not like it's not the way it was characterized in the press. Because if it's put in the proper context, it sounds like, okay, well, that's neat, It's about 5% helpful on setting up the factory and about 1% helpful over the next 20 years. Cool. That actually sounds pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was helpful, but there are a lot of other factors as well. We actually had slightly bigger incentive packages from some other states that were offered, but we factored in how quickly could we get the Gigafactory into operation, what were the risks associated with that progress, what would be the logistics costs over time of transferring battery packs and powertrains to a vehicle factory in California, and all of those factors weighed together is what led us to make the decision in favor of Nevada. And working with your team was great. It was very forward-leaning. And like a big part was also just like making sure you feel really welcome, within the state. That's sort of what led us to make the decision for the Gigafactory. And then we have another factory in New York doing solar panels. Also, actually, will be the biggest solar panel producer in North America when it's done. And then we expect to establish probably at least 2 or 3 more gigafactories in the US in the next several years, as well as a couple overseas. But the overall objective of Tesla is really what set of actions can we take to accelerate the advent of sustainable production and consumption of energy. I think the sort of the way I would assess the historic good of Tesla is in terms of how many years of acceleration was it, and if we can accelerate sustainable energy by 10 years, I would consider that to be a great success. Even if it was only 5 years, that would still be pretty good. That's the overarching optimization.
So you've talked about interplanetary travel and sustainable energy and the vehicles a little bit. What would you want things to look like in 5 to 10 years associated with energy? Sure. And with autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles?
Well, I think things are going to grow exponentially. So there's a big difference between 5 and 10 years. My guess is, probably in 10 years, more than a half of new vehicle production is electric in the United States. And China's probably going to be ahead of that because China's been super pro-EV. I don't think a lot of people know this, but China's environmental policies are way ahead of the U.S. Like their mandate for renewable energy far exceeds the U.S. I think sometimes people are under the impression that China is either dragging their feet or somehow behind the U.S. in terms of sustainable energy promotion, but they're by far the most aggressive on Earth. It's crazy. In fact, a coalition of Chinese car manufacturers just wrote the Chinese government to beg for them to slow down the mandate because it's like too much. They need to make 8% electric vehicles, I think, like next year or in 2 years or something. They can't physically do it. So China's by far the most aggressive on electric vehicles and solar. But that's a common misperception that they're not. There's one Google search away to figure this out, by the way. It's really pretty easy. So, and then in 10 years, man, I think, so half of all production, I think, will be EV. I think almost all cars produced will be autonomous in 10 years. Almost all. It will be rare to find one that is not in 10 years. That's going to be a huge transformation. Now, the thing to bear in mind, though, is that new vehicle production is only about 5% the size of the vehicle fleet. So you think about how long does a car or truck last, and they last 15 to 20 years, so before they're finally scrapped. So new vehicle production is only roughly at most 1/15 of the fleet size. So even when new vehicle production, say, switches over to electric or to autonomous, that still means the vast majority of the fleet on the roads is not. It'll take another, 5 to 10 years before that becomes the majority of the fleet becomes EV or autonomous. But if you were to say go out 20 years, overwhelmingly things are electric, autonomous, overwhelmingly.
Fully autonomous?
Fully autonomous.
So no one will have to touch the steering wheel if there is one?
There will not be a steering wheel. In 20 years, it will be like having a horse. People have horses, which is cool. But
so having a regular car will be like having a horse. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, yeah, and there will be people that have non-autonomous cars, like people have horses. It just would be unusual to use that as a mode of transport.
Yes. All right. Now, let's talk about the energy piece and rooftop solar and storage.
So first of all, it's important to appreciate that the Earth is almost entirely solar powered today, in the sense that the sun is the only thing that keeps us from being at roughly the temperature of cosmic background radiation, which is 3 degrees above absolute zero. If it wasn't for a sun, we'd be a frozen dark ice bowl. And the amount of energy that hits the sun, that reaches us from the sun, is tremendous. It's 99% plus of all energy that Earth has. Then there's this energy we need to use to run civilization, which to us is big, but compared to the amount of energy that reaches us from the sun is tiny. So it's very easy. Like, it actually doesn't take much. If you wanted to power the entire United States with solar panels, it would take a fairly small corner of Nevada, Texas, Utah, anywhere. You only need about 100 miles by 100 miles of solar panels to power the entire United States. And then the batteries you need to store that energy to make sure you have 24/7 power is 1 mile by 1 mile. So one square mile. That's it. Mm-hmm. I showed the graph of or image of this where this is what 100 miles by 100 miles looks like. It's like a little square on the U.S. map. And then there's a little pixel inside there, and that's the size of the battery pack that you need to support that. Real tiny.
So, Will, you talked about 20 years from now, none of us, well, some people will still be using horses or
it won't be zero.
Yeah. But
it's so rare.
So what will the energy piece look like? I mean, what will there be? Transmission lines? Will there be a need?
Yeah, I think there's use of energy is roughly divided into 3 areas, and they're more or less equal at a high level. There's about a third of energy is used for transportation of various kinds. About a third is used for electricity. About a third is used for heating. So if you want to have, and then of the electricity production, call it something on the order of 10%, depending upon how you count it, is renewable. Maybe 15% today. So that means that there's a massive amount of solar that would need to be produced and connected in order to be fully sustainable. Because fully sustainable means you're tackling transport, non-renewable electricity generation, and heating. So that means there will need to be a combination of utility scale solar and rooftop scale solar combined with wind, geothermal, hydro, probably some nuclear for a while, in order to transition to a sustainable situation, which means really for the most part massive growth in solar. And it's going to be important to have rooftop solar in neighborhoods because otherwise there'll need to be massive new transmission lines built. And people do not like having transmission lines go through the neighborhood. They really don't like that. And I agree. So you want to have some localized energy production combined with utility. So you want rooftop solar, utility solar, and that's really going to be the solution from a physics standpoint. That I can't see any other way to really do it. People talk a lot about fusion and all that, but the sun is a giant fusion reactor in the sky, and it's really reliable. It comes up every day. So if it doesn't, we've got bigger problems.
Somebody asked me to ask you this. We talked about workforce today, but they asked me, are robots going to take our jobs, everybody's jobs in the future? Or how much do you see artificial intelligence coming into the workplace?
Well, first of all, I think on the artificial intelligence front, I have exposure to the very most cutting edge AI, and I think people should be really concerned about it. I keep sounding the alarm bell, but until people see like robots going down the street killing people, like they don't know how to react, because it seems so ethereal. I think we should be really concerned about AI, and I think we should. AI is a rare case where I think we need to be proactive in regulation instead of reactive, because I think by the time we are reactive in AI regulation, it's too late. And normally the way regulations are set up is that a whole bunch of bad things happen, there's a public outcry, and then after many years, a regulatory agency is set up to regulate that industry. And there's a bunch of opposition from companies who don't like being told what to do by regulators. Anyway, it takes forever. That in the past has been bad, but not something which represented a fundamental risk to the existence of civilization. AI is a fundamental risk to the existence of human civilization, in a way that car accidents, airplane crashes, faulty drugs, or bad food were not. They were not. They were harmful to a set of individuals within society, of course, but they were not harmful to society as a whole. AI is a fundamental existential risk for human civilization, and I don't think people fully appreciate that. It's not fun being regulated. It's not, it can be pretty irksome, but in the car business, we get regulated by Department of Transport, by EPA, and a bunch of others, and there's regulatory agencies in every country. In space, we get regulated by FAA, but if you ask the average person, hey, do you want to get rid of the FAA and just like take a chance on manufacturers not cutting corners on the aircraft because profits were down that quarter? I was like, hell no. That sounds terrible. So, I think even people who are pretty extremely like libertarian free market, they'd be like, yeah, we should probably have somebody keeping an eye on the aircraft companies, making sure they build a good aircraft and good cars and that kind of thing. So, I think there's a role for regulators. That's very important. And I'm against overregulation for sure. But man, I think we better get on that with AI pronto. And so there'll certainly be a lot of job disruption. Because what's going to happen is robots will be able to do everything better than us. I'm including, I mean, all of us, you know. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what to do about this. This is really like the scariest problem to me, I'll tell you. Yeah, so I really think we need government regulation here, just to, because this is, you know, ensuring the public good is served. Because you've got companies that are racing, that they kind of have to race to build AI, or they're going to be made uncompetitive. You know, like essentially, if your competitor is racing to build AI and you don't, they will crush you. So then you're like, we don't want to be crushed. So, you know, I guess we need to build it too. That's where you need the regulators to come in and say, hey guys, you all need to really, you know, just pause and make sure this is safe. And like when it's cool and and the regulators are convinced that it's safe to proceed, then you can go. But otherwise, slow down. But you kind of need the regulators to do that for all the teams in the game. You know, otherwise the shareholders will be saying like, hey, why aren't you developing AI faster? Because your competitor is. I'm like, okay, we've got to do that. Anyway, so it's like, I mean, there's like something like 12% of jobs are transport. Transport will be one of the first things to go fully autonomous. But when I say everything, like the robots will be able to do everything, bar nothing.
Let's move back to, you're rolling out the Model 3 this year, right? Mm-hmm. And how many orders, what is that going to look like? Yeah, it's going well on that front. We got, I don't know, more. I think like if somebody orders a Model 3 today, they'd only get it probably late next year. We just started production. Made the first production unit last week. The thing that is not well appreciated about something about cars and any kind of new technology is how hard it is to do the manufacturing. It is vastly harder to do the manufacturing by a factor of 100, like 100, than to make one of something. Like, with maybe 50 or 60 people, we could make a prototype of practically anything in 6 months. Now to manufacture that thing, we need 5,000 people to spend, 3 years, and that's considered really fast. So manufacturing does this kind of S-curve where it's excruciatingly slow at first, and then it grows exponentially, but people tend to extrapolate on a straight line. So if it's real slow at first, they say, oh, this is real slow, look at that. They're only going to make 5 cars a week forever. Like, nope. It'll be 10 cars a week, then 20 cars a week, then 40 cars a week, then 5,000 cars a week eventually. Just grows crazy fast. So we're hoping to get to something like 5,000 cars a week by the end of the year. Well, I wanted to give an opportunity for some of the governors to ask questions and perhaps some audience questions. I was told that you'd be willing to do
absolutely.
that.
Great.
So, governors, any questions for Elon? Governor Scott.
Well, thank you very much. We in Vermont have partnered with Tesla in terms of a power pack in our homes, and it's for $15 a day. You can rent this for 15 years, and it'll carry power as a backup generation device for 12 hours, and it's been really, really interesting from my perspective. But I'm curious about vehicles and where we're going in the future, or how far in the future do the cars themselves become the charging device, like the roof and deck lids and hood, or do the batteries get so efficient that you don't need that, and then you just power up for a week or something like that? Where are we going in the future with battery storage?
Yeah, I think the future is there's 3 legs to the stool. There's electric cars, there's a stationary battery pack, and solar power. With those three things, you can have a completely sustainable energy future. That's all that's needed. On the solar front, like I said, it's going to be a combination of rooftop solar and utility scale solar. You'll need both because of the enormous demand for electricity. And then one of the things that's been missing, I think, up till now is having rooftop solar that looks good and isn't that's where we got the solar glass roof that we're developing, and we're doing it in different styles so that it matches the aesthetics of a particular house or regional style. I think that's actually pretty important. But conventional flat panel solars for flat roofs and for commercial will be the way to go. But yeah, and putting solar panels on the car itself, not that helpful because the actual surface area of the car is not very much, and cars are very often indoors, and so it's the least efficient place to put solar is on the car.
Just wondering about maybe a wrap of some sort. Does that make any sense in the future? Like a wrap of solar around either a building made of a solar panel or a wrap of a vehicle actually being the solar panel, but being the components of the vehicle itself?
I don't think so.
I'll scrap that idea.
No, it's just way better to put it on the roof, for sure. And I've really thought about this. I mean, really, and I pushed my team about, like, isn't there some way we could do it on the car? I mean, technically, if you have like some sort of transformer-like thing which will pop out of the trunk like a hard-top convertible and just like ratchet solar panels over the whole surface area of the car, extending like for the entire, say, square footage of a parking space, provided you're in the sun, that would be enough to generate about 20 to 30 miles a day of electricity. But that is for sure the expensive, difficult way to do it.
Governor Burgum.
Still thought about maybe we should, but.
Elon, thanks for being here. With your background in payment systems, you understand the important role of security and transactions.
Yeah.
Now that you've got...
I think security is a huge concern, like cybersecurity.
Yes, and in the vehicles you're building now are incredibly complex software systems. I mean, the car is really a rolling piece of software.
It is. It's like a laptop on wheels.
Yes. So share with us a little bit about your thoughts on cybersecurity and how we protect. You talked about protecting society when you've got a rolling fleet of.
I think one of the biggest risks for autonomous vehicles is somebody achieving a fleet-wide hack. In principle, if somebody was able to hack, say, all of the autonomous Teslas, they could say, I mean, just as a prank, they could say, like, send them all to Rhode Island from across the United States. And they'll be like, well, okay, that would be the end of Tesla. And there'll be a lot of angry people in Rhode Island, that's for sure. So we got to make super sure that a fleet-wide hack is basically impossible, and that if people are in the car, that they have override authority on whatever the car is doing. So if the car is doing something wacky, you can press a button that no amount of software can override. That will ensure that you gain control of the vehicle and cut the link to the servers. So that's pretty fundamental. Within the car, we actually have, even if somebody gains access to the car, there are multiple subsystems within the car that also have specialized encryption. So the powertrain, for example, has specialized encryption. So even if somebody would gain access to the car, they cannot gain access to the powertrain or to the braking system. But it is my top concern from a security standpoint at Tesla is making sure that fleet-wide hack or any vehicle-specific hack can occur. They have the same problem with cell phones. It's kind of crazy today that we live quite comfortably in a world that George Orwell would have thought was super crazy. Like we all carry a phone with a microphone that could be turned on really at any time without our knowledge, with a GPS that knows our position, and a camera, and well, kind of all of our personal information. We do this willingly, and it's kind of wild to think that that's the case. So the phone, like Apple and Google, kind of have the same challenge of making sure there cannot be a fleet-wide hack or a system-wide hack of phones, or a specific hack. So that's our top concern. Yeah, it's going to become a bigger and bigger concern. I think Tesla's, I don't want to tempt fate here, but Tesla's pretty good at software compared to the other car companies. So I think it's going to be a bit like an even bigger challenge for the other car companies to ensure security. Yeah.
Thank you. Governor Dugard.
Thank you, Governor. Mr. Musk, thank you for speaking to all the governors today. It's an honor to have you here. One question I had, we saw when gasoline prices went to $3.50 a gallon, there was a big jump in interest in hybrid vehicles, sure. and you saw those vehicles become very much in demand. And then as gasoline prices have fallen, you've seen a reversal of that. And I'm wondering to what extent you have a concern about the future of electric vehicles in the face of those very low prices. Can you speak to that?
Well, the economics, they kind of set the slope of the curve. So there's no question in my mind whatsoever that all transport, with the ironic exception of rockets, will go fully electric. Everything, planes, trains, automobiles, well, a lot of trains are already electric, all ships, but it's a question of what that time frame is. And the economic incentive structure drives that time frame. That's really what it amounts to. And the big challenge is that there's an unpriced externality in the cost of fossil fuels. So the unpriced externality is the probability weighted harm of changing the chemical constituency of the atmosphere and oceans. Since it is not captured in the price of gasoline, it does not drive the right behavior. It would be like if tossing out garbage was just free, and there was no penalty. You just do as much as you want. Then, like, streets would be full of garbage. And we regulated a lot of other things like sulfur emissions and nitrous oxide emissions and that kind of thing. It's done a lot of good on that front. With CO2, it's tough because there's so many vested interests on the sort of fossil fuel side. And sometimes I feel like those guys feel like kind of hard done by because, it wasn't obvious, like when they were creating their oil and gas companies, that it would be bad for the environment. And they worked really hard to create those companies. And then they feel like, well, now they're being kind of attacked on moral grounds. When they didn't originally start those oil companies or build them up on bad moral grounds. And it is true that we cannot instantaneously change to a sustainable situation. But then those guys will also fight pretty hard to slow down the change. And that's really where I think is morally wrong.
Go to Governor Bevin and then Governor Hutchinson. Then we'll take a couple, and then Governor Hickenlooper, and then we'll take some audience questions. Governor Bevin.
Elon, thank you for being here. The short version of the question, and then slightly longer. The short version is, do you ever feel pressure by others' expectations of you and your endeavors in light of the progress you've made thus far, is the short version. And more specifically, when you look just at Tesla alone, and you look at a company with a $54 billion valuation,
Right.
and seemingly by typical market metrics, no justifiable reason for that.
What are you saying?
I'm just saying, I'm
Sir,
curious.
sir.
I'm just, in all seriousness, do you feel a concern ever that your intellect and your intellectual curiosity and your ingenuity cannot be matched by those that are trying to commercialize it? Does that ever affect how you think or decisions that you make?
Well, it is actually, I find it quite tough when there are very high expectations. I try to actually tamp down those expectations as to be possible. In fact, I've gone on record several times as saying that the stock price is higher than we have any right to deserve. And that's for sure true based on where we are today and have been in the past. So the stock price obviously reflects a lot of optimism about where Tesla will be in the future. And now the thing that makes that quite a difficult emotional hardship for me is that those expectations sometimes get out of control. And I hate disappointing people, and so I'm trying real hard to meet those expectations, but that's a pretty tall order. And a lot of times it's really not fun, I have to say. A whole lot less fun than it may seem. So, yeah. I mean, I don't ever sell any stock unless I have to for taxes. So, I've said publicly, I'm not going to take money off the table. I'll be last. I'm going down with the ship. So I'll be the last to do it. Yeah, I mean, I really wouldn't recommend anyone start a car company. I really wouldn't recommend it. It's not a recipe for happiness and freedom.
Thanks, Governor Bevin. Governor Hutchinson.
Mr. Musk, Asa Hutchinson from Arkansas, thank you for your frank observations about exploration. I look at the spirit of invention and the spirit of exploration, which is really the hallmark of America. What is your comment on NASA, its mission? I was in Congress, I supported NASA, but I always feel like it's floundering, does not have the support of the American people that's needed. What's your comment on NASA, its mission, and what advice would you give us?
Sure. Well, first of all, I should say I'm a big fan of NASA. In fact, at one point, my password was "I love NASA." Literally, that was my password. I think NASA does a lot of good things for which it doesn't get enough credit, and that the public, I guess, doesn't know that much about. Most members of the public, they're not really into hard science. It's not the thing they're tuning in for most of the time. I love hard science, but it's not that popular. So, but there's great things in terms of the telescopes like the Hubble and the James Webb and the rovers on Mars and the probes to the outer solar system. Those are all really great things. But to get the public excited, you've got to get people in the picture. It's just 100 times different if there are people in the picture. If there's some criticism of NASA, it's important to remember people in the picture. If you want to get the public support. If you talk to a scientist about that, they say well, where's the science in that? You're not getting it. It's that's not why people are giving you money. It's a little bit of the reason, but the serious scientists are people just make things more expensive. Why do we have people? Okay, well, why do we have people at all? Or anywhere? Sometimes the scientists are the ones who just don't understand. Even though they're smart people, but So you got to have something that's going to fire up the, fire people up and get them really excited. And like, I think if we had a serious goal of having a base on the moon and sending people to Mars, and said, okay, we're going to be outcome oriented. How are we going to do this? Okay, we got to change the way contracting is done. You can't do these like cost plus sole source contracts, because then the incentive structure is all messed up. So as soon as you don't have any competition, well, okay, there's no, the sense of urgency goes away. And as soon as you make something a cost plus contract, you're incenting the contractor to maximize the costs of the program because they get a percentage. So they never want that gravy train to end, and they want to make it, they become cost maximizers. And then you have good people engaged in cost maximization because you just gave them an incentive to do that and told them they'll get punished if they don't. Essentially, that's what happens. So it's critically important that we change the contracting structure to be a competitive commercial bid. Make sure that there are always at least two entities that are competing to serve NASA, and that the contracts are milestone-based with concrete milestones. PowerPoint presentations do not count. Like everything works in PowerPoint. Okay, you can say, I have a teleportation device. Look, here's my PowerPoint presentation. So milestone-based, competitive commercial contracts with competitors, and then you've got to be prepared to fire one of those competitors if they're not cutting it, and recompete the remainder of that contract. And by the way, NASA's actually already done this, and they did it with the commercial cargo transportation to the space station. And that was a case where NASA, NASA actually, I'm not sure if they thought it would work or not work, but they didn't have the budget to do anything else. So they're like, okay, we're going to try this competitive commercial milestone-based contracting, and it worked great. And they awarded it to two companies, to SpaceX and a company called Kistler. And SpaceX managed to meet the milestones. Kistler did not, so then NASA recompeted the remainder of the contract to Orbital Sciences, but then Orbital Sciences got across the finish line. So now NASA's got two suppliers for taking cargo to the space station, and it's a great situation. Same thing for commercial crew to the space station. NASA competed that. In the commercial crew case, it's SpaceX and Boeing. And I think that's also a good situation. So now, like I can tell you, like the SpaceX team is like, we're going to do this before Boeing. That's for sure. And then like I read out the Boeing team, they're like, we're going to do this before SpaceX. That's good. It's a good forcing function to get things done. I can't tell you how important that contracting structure is. That is night and day. There's way too much in government which is where it's a sole source cost plus contract. That just, again, economics 101, whatever you incent, that will happen. And people shouldn't be surprised. It's like, oh, you just, said, okay, if that company manages to find some excuse to double the cost of the contract, they're going to get double the profit because they're getting a percentage. So they can do exactly that. And also, they're not going to say no to requirements. So the government will come up with some set of requirements. 90% of them could make a lot of sense, and 10% of them are cockamamie that double the price of the project. For those 10% of cockamamie requirements in a cost-plus contract, the contractor will always say yes.
There could be a future for you in government contracting at the state level.
Yeah.
Let's go to Governor Hickenlooper and then Governor Ducey.
So I think like most governors, I find it so refreshing to have the unbridled truth, but I do suspect every time you say publicly that the stock price is higher than we have any right to believe, I'm going to guess you probably get some calls from investors suggesting that maybe you don't say that so frequently.
Yeah, that's true.
I wanted to go back and just briefly, because I think I wrote this down, that you said that artificial intelligence is the fundamental existential risk facing civilization. Did I get that close enough?
In my opinion, it is the biggest risk that we face as a civilization is artificial intelligence.
And so to a group of leaders, what would you advise that how should we be addressing something that's such a large landscape and yet obviously so important?
I think that one of the roles of government is to ensure the public good, and to that dangers to the public are addressed. So that hence the regulatory thing. I think the first order of business would be to try to learn as much as possible. To understand the nature of the issues, to look closely at the progress that is being made, and the remarkable achievements of artificial intelligence. Last year, Go, which is quite a difficult game to beat, that people thought would never be beaten with by a computer, that a computer would either never beat the best human player or that it was 20 years away. And last year, AlphaGo, which was done by DeepMind, which is a kind of a Google subsidiary, absolutely crushed the world's best player. And now it can play the top 50 simultaneously and crush them all. So just like that pace of progress is remarkable. And you can see more and more coming out. I think the robotics, you can see robots that can learn to walk from nothing, within hours, like way faster than any biological being. But the thing that's most dangerous is, and it's the hardest to kind of wrap, kind of get your arms around because it's not a physical thing, is kind of a deep intelligence in the network. You say, well, what harm could a deep intelligence in the network do? So, well, it could start a war by doing fake news and spoofing email accounts and fake press releases, and just by manipulating information. The pen is mightier than the sword. As an example, I want to emphasize, I do not think this actually occurred. This is purely a hypothetical that I'm digging my grave here. But there was that second Malaysian airliner that was shot down on the Ukrainian-Russian border, and that really amplified tensions between Russia and the EU in a massive way. Well, let's say if you had an AI that was where the AI's goal was to maximize the value of a portfolio of stocks. One of the ways to maximize value would be to go long on defense, short on consumer, start a war. And then how could it do that? Well, hack into the Malaysian Airlines aircraft routing server, route it over a war zone, then send an anonymous tip that an enemy aircraft is flying overhead right now.
Let's go to Governor Ducey, and then we'll have, after Governor Ducey, we'll finish our gubernatorial questions, and then 2 questions, then quick questions, or 1 audience question, and then we'll be done. We're running short on time. Governor Ducey.
Thanks, Elon. I really enjoyed your comments today. And as someone who has spent a lot of time in his administration trying to reduce and eliminate regulations, I was surprised by your suggestion to bring regulations before we know exactly what we're dealing with AI. And I've heard the example used, if I were to come up with a colorless, odorless, tasteless gas that was explosive, people would say, well, you have to ban that, and then we'd have no natural gas. So you've given some of these examples of how AI can be an existential threat, but I still don't understand as policymakers what type of regulations beyond slow down, which typically policymakers don't get in front of entrepreneurs or innovators.
Well, I think the first order of business would be to gain insight. Right now, the government does not even have insight. And I think the right order of business would be to stand up a regulatory agency, initial goal, gain insight into the status of AI activity, make sure the situation is understood. Once it is, then put regulations in place to ensure public safety. That's it. And for sure, the companies doing AI will, most of them, not mine, will squawk and say, hey, this is really going to stifle innovation, blah, blah, blah. It's going to move to China. It won't. And it won't, because has Boeing moved to China? Nope. They're building aircraft here. Same on cars. And so the notion that if you establish a regulatory regime, that companies will just simply move to countries with lower regulatory requirements is false on the face of it, because none of them do. Unless it's really overbearing, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm just talking about, making sure that there is awareness at the government level. I think once there is awareness, people will be extremely afraid, as they should be.
All right, one audience question. We'll take the first hand that came up. Right here.
Thanks, Elon. Ina Fried with Axios. Early on in this administration, you had argued pretty vociferously that it was best to engage and better to be in the room than not be in the room. Then when the president decided to pull out of Paris, you said that was kind of the last straw and you were going to drop off. Mm-hmm. What drove you to that? And if you were still speaking to him today, what would you say to the president?
Well, I thought it was worth doing, trying hard to, to do what's worth. It was worth trying. I got a lot of flack from multiple fronts for even trying. When some guy ran at billboards and attacking me and full-page ads in the New York Times and whatnot, just for being on the panel, and in every meeting I was just trying to make the arguments in favor of sustainability, and sometimes other issues, like we need to make sure that our immigration laws are not unkind or unreasonable, did my best. And I think in a few cases I did actually make some progress, which gave me some encouragement to continue. But then I just really think that the Paris Accord, man, if I stayed on the councils, then I'd be essentially saying that wasn't important, but it was super important, because I think a country needs to keep its word. It's not even a binding agreement. So we could always slow it down. The argument that there would be job losses, well, we could see if there are job losses before we exit the agreement. And maybe there won't be job losses, maybe there'll be job gains. But yeah, there's just no way I could stay on after that. So, did my best.
All right, well, everybody, if you would please join me in thanking Elon for being here today.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Be someone with a lantern on a pole. I'm like, okay, but you should really get rid of that regulation. And they did, because it would really be awkward. So just regulations, even if done correctly and being right at the time, it's always important to go back and scrub those, periodically to make sure they're still sensible and they're still serving the greater good. I think in terms of tax structure, what is economically incented and what is not economically incented, just make sure that the incentive structure is correct. I think I'm saying just totally common sense things here. But it's economics 101. Whatever you incent will happen. So the if you incent one thing, that thing will tend to happen more than the other thing. If you incent another thing, that thing will happen. And so the economics should favor innovation. And this is particularly important to protect small to medium-sized companies, because it's sort of like trying to grow a tree in a forest. Like, it's real hard for a new company to grow. When it's just a seedling or a sapling, it needs a lot more protection than if it's a giant redwood or something like that. So very important to give support to small small to medium-sized companies on the innovation front. And they're the ones that need it more than the big companies. And I think at this point Tesla is almost a big company, biggish company anyway. So I'd favor, supporting smaller companies than Tesla, relatively speaking.
What would your response be? Because there are critics out there with regard to incentives, and that,
Sure.
and Tesla has been, and I can speak from experience, the beneficiary of incentives, economic incentives, with regard to the Gigafactory.
Sure.
What would you tell those people?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, as you know, those incentives were a little overstated. In the case of the Gigafactory, it's a $5 billion investment, capital investment, to get that factory going. And I didn't actually know this until, by the way, I didn't know this until we did the press conference. Actually, that over 20 years, the Nevada incentives added up to $1.3 billion. I actually didn't even know this. But it's,
now he's telling. Go ahead.
Literally, I learned it at the press conference. I'm like, really? No, but I mean, the thing is that they took what added up over 20 years and made it sound like Nevada was writing us a $1.3 billion check. And I'm still waiting for that check. Did it get lost in the mail? I don't know. But this is the way the press works, of course. Now if you divide 1.3 billion by 20, okay, then it's like, okay, Tesla's on average receives a sort of a tax. It's basically sales and use tax abatement is what it amounts to. So Tesla gets like we get on the order of 50 to 60 million of sales and use tax abatement divided.
Well, good afternoon and welcome, Elon. Oh, I was going to take off my tie. Is that all right if I do that?
I came in with a tie, but then I was like told there should be a tie, so.
Then we'll both be more comfortable.
That's good. Well, thanks for having me.
Appreciate your being here today. It's when I'm with you, it's difficult to know where to start. Let's start just what drives you. What is it that when you wake up in the morning, do you see a problem and you want to solve it?
I think the thing that drives me is that I want to be able to think about the future and feel good about that. We're doing what we can to have the future be as good as possible. To be inspired by what is likely to happen, and to look forward to the next day. So that's what really drives me is trying to figure out how do we make sure that things are great and going to be so, and that's the underlying principle behind Tesla and SpaceX. Is that I think it's pretty important that we accelerate the transition to sustainable generation and consumption of energy. It's inevitable, but it matters if it happens sooner or later. And then SpaceX
for the future.
Well, it sure is important to get the rules right, it's sort of. in terms of legislative and executive actions, it's sort of like, think of, say, like professional sports or something. If you don't have the rules right, if there isn't, if the game isn't set up properly, it's not going to be a good game. So it's real important to get the rules right. Now, I think it's worth noting that I think still in the United States the rules are still better than anywhere else. It's very easy to put something in place which is an inhibitor to innovation without realizing it. So in terms of the regulatory environment, it's always important to bear in mind that regulations are immortal, and they never die unless somebody actually goes and kills them, and then they get a lot of momentum. So a lot of times regulations can be put in place for all the right reasons, but then nobody goes back and gets rid of them afterwards when they no longer make sense. And there used to be a rule in the early days when people were concerned about automobiles, because that was a pretty scary thing to see a carriage just going wrong by itself. You never know what those things might do. So there were like rules where you had to, in a lot of states, where you had to carry a lantern in front of the automobile. It had to be like 100 paces ahead of the automobile. It is about helping make life multiplanetary and doing what we can to continue the dream of Apollo and ultimately make a contribution to life becoming multiplanetary.
Well, let's talk a little more about that. I think everyone very interested in that when you say making life multiplanetary.
Yeah. That's exciting.
It is exciting. So what's your vision there?
I think, particularly for Americans, like think about America is a nation of explorers. People came here from other parts of the world that, chose to give up the known in favor of the unknown. So I think exploration, I think the United States is a distillation of the human spirit of exploration. So that's why it appeals to Americans so much. You can see this when, say, there was a shuttle tragedy and 7 people died. And that's terrible, but a lot of people die all the time. But why do we care so much? Because it was the dream of exploration that was dying along with those people. That's why.
No, and I'm one of those, and probably like many of you, remember exactly where you were when that tragedy happened. So you have 30 plus governors here today, and we're very excited about your willingness to be with us. And you hopefully heard me talk a little bit about my initiative, which is being ahead of the curve. What do you tell us as governors? What should we be thinking about in terms of innovation and developing public policy